Hi everyone, I'm Nat, Head of Community, Exceptional Individuals. You know the drill by now, but I'm going to get right to it and talk about the stupid dyslexic trope. Now, this title is a little bit pretty it is kind of like meant to make people a bit angry because in TV and media, they do have things called tropes, and tropes are kind of things that are continuously like churned again and again, such as blondes are dumb, fat people are jolly, ADHD people get distracted by shiny things, like all these things which when you think of, it's the first thing that pops into your head. Now, these things that pop into your head, they don't just pop out of nowhere. They are kind of implanted. And I think it's really important that if we really genuinely do care about making the world more inclusive, particularly, let's say for dyslexics, because I'm dyslexic and I know probably a lot of you are, then we need to understand, why do people have these preconceived ideas that we are dumb, stupid, not intelligent, accident prone, all of these things. So that was kind of the reasoning for diving in a bit deeper for today. So as you're saying, today we're focusing on dyslexia, but honestly, all of these have been affected dramatically by the media. Our last webinar, which we did last week, was dyslexia discrimination. Personally, I thought it was really interesting. We took a deep dive into a couple of case studies of real tribunals. So people have taken their companies to court for discriminating against dyslexia. But where does discrimination come from? Is it something that we are born with? Is it something that we develop and grow with? Or is it kind of like planted into our subconscious via the media we consume? I personally think it's a bit of everything. So even though today might seem, a bit of a lighter subject, a bit nerdy, just having a bit of fun looking at different cartoons and TV series, it does actually have a big impact, because generations and generations of kids will watch these shows and grow up with this being the default image on how they perceive a certain ability or disability. So let's start off with it, the stupid dyslexic trope. So we've done dyslexia in pop culture before, but I wanted to really focus on today on how it has been portrayed in a negative light, which, to be honest, was easier to research than the other. So it might be like this little image here, dyslexia for cure found. It's a very light-hearted joke. It's just passed on. Now, I genuinely want to know your opinions. Is it bad to make these small little light-hearted jokes, or is there a bigger consequence to them? I'm open-minded to kind of hearing the answer from all of you, but I will give lots of examples. And for any of you who have ever been made fun of or felt that you couldn't talk about your dyslexia in public, these probably aren't the best forms of media, because it just kind of keeps that narrative alive. So a quick thing, what is pop culture? Pop culture is simply just modern popular culture that's transmitted via mass media. So when you're at home and you're saying, oh, what you watch on Netflix later? Or, oh yeah, I read it in the paper. It's anything which is kind of like common knowledge. Like, for instance, you may not watch EastEnders, but you definitely know what it is. Game of Thrones, you again might have not seen it, but I'm pretty certain you've heard of it. So these are kind of views and ideas that are very rooted. You may personally have never met someone who is blonde, who is a bit ditzy, but because you've watched enough media, that is the image which is kind of embedded into your subconscious. The first question I want to ask all of you, when thinking of how dyslexia is shown in media, what words come to mind? So try and think, you're just thinking of dyslexia, what words pop into your head? And this can be anything, positive, negative, neutral, anything. We want to try and find out, what is our default view of dyslexia? First one that popped up, stupid. Yeah, let's face it, it is. And it also depends on what media you watch. Most of us love movies from the 80s and 90s, don't we? Like that was a golden age of it, but they were probably one of the worst culprits. Okay, we've got people that can't count, illiterate. That's a big one we're going to be learning today. Most of us will know, right? Dyslexics aren't illiterate. Very, very few dyslexics are illiterate. But yet that is kind of like 99% of how they're portrayed on media. Confused, yeah, a little bit dim, a bit like, they're kind of used as the comic relief. A slow reader reads backwards. Yeah, exactly. People think we read backwards or we like talk in like rhyme or code. So all the ways that people think of dyslexia without actually knowing it do tend to be very characterized versions of it. Things that are made to really exacerbate our qualities, because ultimately media is made for entertainment. So it stands for reason why they would want to exaggerate certain characteristics. There's nothing wrong with that necessarily. But what is wrong is when individuals who do not have exposure to real life examples thinking that this is the only version of dyslexia they know. So say you go up to your boss and you tell them you're dyslexic, surely that should be a good thing, a very empowering moment. But if your boss has watched loads of cartoons from the 90s, then their first gut reaction is going to be, you're dumb. And this does have a big impact. So again, I'm not here to solve the problem today. I wish I could, but I think at least understanding the problem can get this conversation started. So let's start off with some films. Again, this is a quick selection of films which I've watched and I thought, you know what? This probably hasn't helped our cause in getting awareness and equality. So before I go on to the ones that I've seen and know, I would love to know, do you have any names of films that you know or believe to be dyslexic? And let's see if we kind of overlap at all. So any films that have a dyslexic character, even if you don't know, they definitely are, even if you kind of assume. Because as we learned in previous webinars, there isn't really much proof. No one says I'm actually officially diagnosed. A lot of the time it is inferred. So it's up to the viewer to guess. Okay, we got no, just autistic, like Rayman. Yeah, and you know what? I don't blame any of you for struggling on this one. Dyslexia isn't often spoken about. It's normally inferred, or they kind of use a different thing. Like, do you know any characters that are illiterate or can't read or make mistakes or hate education or disruptive in class? These are also other common tropes which are kind of linked together. Well, if you don't know any now, you will know by the end. So the first one is the 1987 comedy Summer School. Now, this is obscure, okay? I don't expect many people would have, but I think it's quite an interesting example. Yeah, like, who has? I watched it through doing this research, but this has a double part. So this is obviously stigmatizing dyslexia, but also the stereotype that young Black women are sassy and, you know, argumentative and aggressive. So this has kind of got a double whammy. So in this, the main kind of character has to become a teacher. He's a real troublemaker, a bit of a goof, you know, doesn't really care about any of these things, but somehow he's in charge of his summer school. And he has to teach the worst possible kids you can imagine, the most disruptive, the most unteachable, the people who have like the lowest potential. And there's this character, Denise. She is really defensive, really sassy, you know, and she just hates reading and writing. But it finds out, oh, guess what? She's actually really, really intelligent. And the guy who's running the summer school has to like prove like, hey, wait, my kids are just as smart, if not smarter than everyone else here, but we aren't seeing them in the most positive light. So in one way, this is quite a positive film to start off with, because it is kind of like smashing that stereotype, saying you perceive these individuals who struggle with reading and writing as disruptive, as argumentative, but actually they are gifted. They just have a different way of learning. This film obviously is a comedy and is meant to be kind of like tongue-in-cheek, but I think it's an interesting kind of one to start with, even if it is a massive cliche, which, let's face it, most films tend to be. We've got, yes, Black people worldwide, especially males, are shown to look illiterate. That is a big thing. I don't know if this is true, but there's always this thing that, oh, Black people are more likely to be illiterate, aren't able to read, lower intelligence, these things, and they're awful. And I'm not going to compare that to the dyslexia thing because it's a whole different thing and arguably a lot worse. But you will notice that these things kind of cross over. So at one time, there was a statement, there was a stat, I can't remember where it came from, so don't quote me, but it's like half the prison population is believed to be dyslexic. But we also know that I don't know, but way over half the percent of the prison population is Black, particularly in the US. So, put them together, Black dyslexics. It's difficult, isn't it? Because we all know about the systemic reasons about why there is a disproportionate amount of Black people in prison. But when you take away the race from it and just look at their intellectual, maybe not intellectual ability, but their education level, like how much education they've had, you'll notice that a lot of them have very low education. So interesting. So a quick question to all of you. Children with dyslexia are more likely to be disruptive students. Do you agree with this or disagree? Do you think that if you are dyslexic, the likelihood of you being disruptive or a nonconformist is higher? Now, okay, I agree. Most of you say yeah. I would like to know now, though, why? Why are people with dyslexia more likely to be disruptive? We've all probably been in the lowest sets. We've always been probably like naughty, disruptive. Maybe some of us have been expelled from school. Are we inherently more troublesome, or is there another underlying reason?
From my own personal experience, I was given the impression I was disruptive because I would ask a lot of questions. And sometimes the response when I was at school was, oh, we'll just read the text. And it would then sort of escalate from there, from my frustrations that because I couldn't read the text as well as other students because I was undiagnosed at the time. So I think I was seen as disruptive because I was asking too many questions and not being quiet during the quiet study time.
Thanks for sharing that, Laura. I appreciate it. I completely resonate. I was always asking questions, like really inquisitive and just wanting to understand things, break things apart. But eventually you get labeled as a troublemaker. And you know what they say, if someone says something enough to you, you start to believe it, or you start to act up to this image that people have of you.
Yeah.
So the next one, and again, if you haven't seen this film, I don't blame you, but it's Naked Gun 33 1/4, The Final Insult. And this is just a really small thing. The whole film isn't about dyslexia. It's quite funny, actually. But the main joke is dyslexia for cure found. Again, it's a very passing thing. It's a matter of a few seconds, just a couple of frames. But why is this important? Well, again, it's just reinforcing dyslexia as a joke. There's there's so many jokes. If you Google dyslexic jokes, don't get me wrong, I find a lot of them funny. I can laugh at myself. But it does have an impact, for the people who watch it, like the children who think, oh, dyslexia is a joke. It's about confusing words, mixing things up. So it's kind of really creating this idea. And this eventually can seep through to the sets you're in, to the jobs you can get, to your self-esteem, how you view yourself. So there is a ripple effect. Sanjan says, I always said I couldn't concentrate, fidgety, easily bored, not conforming. Yeah. And what else we got? Because of our struggles, worth reading out loud and having to copy from blackboards and struggling with direction. Absolutely. Okay, now this is a difficult one. Is it ever okay to make fun of a disability? So we've got no, never. Depends on the disability. Yes, free speech. If no harm is meant, it's okay. Only if you have the disability yourself. And I know this might seem at the beginning, obviously never, but what about comedy, things like stand-up or things like South Park or Simpsons? If we're never able to make fun of it, can we never really engage in the conversation? Can we not make it lighthearted or empowering? I don't know. And it's difficult. Like, is it okay for me to make a dyslexic joke? But if someone who doesn't have it makes fun of it, is that now discrimination? We've got only if you have the disability yourself. Yeah, I think I probably lean towards that as well, because I don't like things like being like off limit, like, oh, you can't talk about that. At the end of the day, this is our life. I don't want it to be so serious. I want to be able to make jokes at my own expense. But by doing it to someone else, you're making them feel awful. So I think it's just about, yes, make jokes about whatever you like, but be mindful about the consequences. And, for instance, when people would say, when I tell people I'm dyslexic, the kids, they would just say, oh, can you read this? What about this? Can you read that? And it wasn't great. So here's the next movie. Believe it or not, in Harry Potter, there is a dig at potentially a dyslexic. So in the Chamber of Secrets, Draco is telling one of his minions, Crab and Goyle, and I want to say Goyle, or yeah, I think so. He says, oh, I was reading. But this is kind of Harry Potter in disguise, by the way. And he says, I didn't know you could read. So it's this assumption that the sidekick is always the dim one. Because think about it, like Draco, very smart, leader of the pack, and he has his two kind of friends, or kind of not really friends, but people who follow him around, and they are kind of conceived as the dumb sidekick, which is something that we see all the time, like the bodyguard, the extra, the plus one. You don't often have someone with a disability or a different way of learning as the central lead. There's a few examples, but very, very few. Mostly they are seen as the follower, as a kind of like dim-witted buffoon who goes along with the plan of the over-intelligent, evil person. Sanjan says, it's also the same with race jokes, only acceptable within the community. That is a thing, and that is something which I thought about as well. Again, we all know about like the N-word, how it's not cool to say for many, many reasons, historically awful. But for the community, which I guess resonates with it, I'm sorry about my language if it's clunky, but, they can say it because you can reclaim it. It's also like the gay community, like words like queer used to be a massive insult, but now it's a way of identifying. But I think it all depends on how you use it and who uses it. So really interesting. All right, quick question. When I tell people I'm dyslexic, they automatically assume I can't read. Do you get this all the time, some of the times, or never? So we've got, some of the times. And this is interesting because remember I said the stats are that, like, I'm making the stat up, but it's really low. Let's say like 1% of people with dyslexia cannot read. The very, very vast majority of people with dyslexia can read. Or if they can't read, they have the capability to learn to read if given the right support. But we still have this kind of idea in our head that a lot of people think when you say you're dyslexic, they just assume that you can't read. And this is directly related to how the media is continuously like showing us on TV. We're always the person who's scratching our heads, reading things wrong, making mistakes, getting into trouble. And again, you can kind of see why they do it, because they want to make the show as entertaining as possible. If someone has a big nose, you make their nose bigger. If someone is, a bit ditzy, you'll make them incredibly ditzy. Everything's always exaggerated. So though I can understand why they do it, it still has an effect on the wider community, on how the everyday person views people who are neurodiverse. And then you get to this point where like people are like, well, we should disclose, you should tell people if you're dyslexic so then we can help you. In principle, that sounds great. But in reality, if people still have these ideas of us, is it always the best option? Okay, I usually get, oh, you can speak and write well. My reading is very slow and muddled. Yeah, and it can work the other way as well. We've also got senior management and line managers charge overnight when they were made aware I was in the middle of getting an ND assessment. Oh, they changed overnight when they were made aware. Yeah, people can completely change their views on you, how they treat you, the jobs you have available. So it's difficult, because obviously in the role I do, we're meant to help organizations get people to disclose their neurodivergence because it means they can get support. But how can you, with a good conscience, encourage individuals to do that when you know that people already have these views about them? Getting rid of this kind of idea and bias takes a long, long time. Okay, Annie, it's not a good film, by the way. I wouldn't recommend this version, but it's interesting for this example nevertheless. So Annie's dark secret is revealed when the freckless guy puts a speech on the teleprompter for her to read, assuming she can because of her age. So this is a bit of a different one. So Annie has dyslexia, and because she is of a certain age, people assume she can do things other people her age can do. And this is one that I particularly struggled with a lot growing up, because I would say on average, I was always probably about 2 years behind my peers when it came to things like reading, writing, speaking, tying my laces, knowing the days of the week, times tables. Everything took me a lot longer. So there were definitely occasions when people would say, "Hey, Nat, can you stand up and write on the board?" And the idea of, I can't spell this, I'm going to make myself look stupid and dumb, would terrify me. And either you get up and embarrass yourself, or you are disruptive and you're like, I'm not going to do it. And then you're labeled as difficult. So on the comment about managers changing overnight when you disclose, they go on to say, they all of a sudden couldn't speak and communicate with me properly. This could be due to the suggested workplace recommendations. Yeah, I mean, I feel a lot of the time people have good intentions, or they're not really well thought out. So like, let's say when someone makes a show and they kind of mention dyslexia or use it as a passing joke, are they going out of their way to belittle the community? I doubt they are. But it's because they're not really kind of breaking it down or having empathy, because maybe for whatever reason, they're at a place in their life where they're not bothered about it, or they just don't have any like direct connection. Now, this one is Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. So a bit more of a mature film. Awesome film, by the way, if you haven't seen it. So Jade Fox is like the bad character, and she stole a manual on martial arts. But since she didn't know how to read, she could only pick up moves based on the pictures. Well, that sounds like a good thing, doesn't it? Using your initiative. But her friend Jen knew how to read and became a much more skilled martial artist after studying the manual, leading Jade Fox to hate her. So this one is saying those who struggle to read, those who have potentially dyslexia, are always going to be at a disadvantage. They're always going to have their comeuppance, and those who do not have any challenges will overcome. Is there a link between criminal activity and dyslexia? Probably, but not because dyslexia is naturally inherently a criminal condition, but because society isn't created for people who can't do what the rest of the society deems as normal. Being able to read to a certain level, being able to write to a certain level, being able to process information in a certain time. So yes, the Jade character is bad for stealing, but I can't help feel bad for them because they were shown as the bad person for like lacking a skill, for not being able to do something the other person could. That was like their Achilles heel. So this isn't such a black and white example of good person, bad person, smart person, dumb person. Dyslexics normally get chucked in with the bad or dumb category rather than the heroic, innovative, problem-solving, thinking out type of the box individual that we know them to be. We've got a comment saying, definitely with my colleagues, I was hesitant to tell them, but had to because of using recording devices. It's like, again, I would love it that people could disclose, and I can't get away with it. My dyslexia is so strong that you'd figure it out sooner or later anyway. But it would be better if I had that chance to explain to them what dyslexia is, at least from my point of view, before just saying, here you are, make your own opinions. Because for all I know, they have spent their whole life digesting pop culture, which, let's face it, we all have. They are going to have these ideas about me. So do you disagree or agree on this? Dyslexia has put me at a disadvantage in life. And the second question is, there are more positives than negatives, referring to dyslexia. There's no right or wrong answer on this. I just want your honest views. Going back to talking about employers, I thought my team already knew. I included the details on my application for really educate me in terms of how disclosing works in firms. Yeah, disclosure is a difficult one. You've always got to ask why. Are they doing it for their stats, their data, or are they doing it because they genuinely want to help you? I mean, I become a bit pessimistic doing what I do, but there are definitely companies out there who want to support. We've just got to find them. Okay, so we've got dyslexia has put me at a disadvantage in life. Most of you strongly agree. Do I think dyslexia is inherently a disadvantage? No, I do not. But do I think our society was created for people with dyslexia? No. So yes, dyslexia is a disadvantage in our current world we live in. But with a company that's inclusive or family around you that love you and finding coping strategies, it doesn't have to be. And the next one is, are there more positives and negatives? There are less of you think that's true. I would argue that there's probably equals, probably 50-50. But again, it's easy for me to say, we've all got our own kind of like privilege. We also have our own kind of categories. Like, for instance, as a white male with dyslexia, it's going to be less of a negative than, say, a female Black dyslexic, just because there's other things that are like, kind of think of them like add-ons. People discriminate for one reason, and you've got another thing, then another thing, and it does add up. Dyslexia might not be the worst disability in the world, but it's definitely something which makes every other thing in your life more challenging. Now for Beauty and the Beast. And Beauty and the Beast, I'm talking about the 2017 one, but even the 2001 version has some kind of like hints towards it. So Gaston, he says, "Oh, can you read this? And how can you read this? There's no pictures." Making it kind of like on this, he is made to seem as the bad character because he's putting down someone who likes reading down, but no one ever stops to think from his perspective. It's kind of interesting. Admittedly, at this time, no one could read, so Belle was in the minority. But in the live action version, his friend, was it LeFou? His little kind of minion. He tries to spell the name, and he's like, I can't spell. It just occurs to me that I'm illiterate. So a lot of people in this community where most people cannot read, Belle is the outcast. But in a society where most people can read and do not struggle with reading and writing, it's the person who struggles who is the outcast. So I think regardless of which character is good or bad in this, it is interesting to see, depending where you are in history, time, and culture, people will view your ability, disability, whatever, in different lights. Well, thanks for pointing out multiple discrimination factors, Nat. Anytime. I just wish we could get rid of them. So, quick question. Do you read for leisure? Yes or no? You can probably guess why I'm asking this, because there's often this kind of stigma attached to people with dyslexia do not read for fun. Oh, you're dyslexic. Oh, what should we put on a movie? No, people with dyslexia can absolutely read. But at the moment, we've got 50-50 here. And I think that's fair. Some will not, some will. I know a lot of people who can read perfectly fine, no difficulties or challenges whatsoever. Yet they never pick up a book in their life. Just because someone struggles with something doesn't mean that they wouldn't want to do it for fun anyway. I have dyspraxia. I'm terrible at coordination. Yeah, I love cycling. And I used to like skateboarding until I fell off too much. So I think we've got to get rid of this opinion. You know, every time in TV, no one ever says, oh, yeah, I have dyslexia. Oh, yeah, I still like reading. Or I still like writing, even though it takes me a bit longer. It's always, I have this. So as a result of having this, I will not, cannot, and refuse to do this, this, and this. This is why people with dyslexia seem to be quite ignorant, because we're kind of shown as not trying, not being willing to learn, not pushing ourselves, never taking the more kind of prestigious avenue of like being the academic. Pirates of the Caribbean. Again, this is a really small one and quite similar to the Beauty and the Beast example, where, let's face it, not many pirates could read at that time due to not having the education. But the fact that this was made in current times, I think you can use. So one of the pirates is trying to read his Bible, and the other one says, you know you can't read. And he's like, it's the Bible, you get credit for trying. Really, throw away, you know, it's a throwaway thing. It's not the end of the world. You would think this wouldn't have a big impact. But if people are reading these little short snippets again and again and again and again, compared to the amount of times they see something like dyslexia portrayed in a positive light, which is never, that is going to be their default view on people. So our job of trying to justify our abilities and fighting for equality and not to be discriminated against isn't going to be something that goes away. You like to think that as generations, you know, move on and progress, society becomes more and more accepting. But that's not necessarily the case. It depends what we're being exposed to. And we're being exposed to more media than we ever have in all of human history. So these things are going to keep cropping up. A comment we got is, my attention hinders me from reading massive amounts of text. Made a conscious effort to start using text-to-speech. Yeah, I listen to audiobooks and I consider that reading because I'm still gaining the same kind of output from it. But I have people saying to me, oh, that's not reading, you're cheating. How is it cheating? It's called, you know, innovation, you know, finding a different way of doing something which works better for your type of brain. I don't like it when, you know, I feel like dumb or stupid when people say, oh, what are you reading at the moment? And I'll say, oh, well, I'm listening to this. And they'll kind of like, like, no, doesn't count. Again, I don't think many people do it to be mean or anything, but it is something which you experience on a day-to-day. So now we're moving on to television programs. And who doesn't love a bit of television? Again, I've got a degree in this, so I should be able to help you. Do you know any dyslexic TV personalities or characters? So anyone on TV, be it real or not real, that you have heard or thought to be dyslexic. There's more people than you'd realize. I can think of half a dozen presenters who have talked about it. And we all know there's this kind of a view that everyone with who's dyslexic works in the arts or like in a hands-on trade. Though that's not inherently like has to be true, we do tend to gravitate to roles that have more flexibility in how we express ourselves. Sanjay says, I don't read much fiction because I get exhausted from needing to read factual text. That's true for me. Sometimes I'll like read a chapter and then go onto my audiobook because I get really tired. So it's not that any of us cannot read, it's that the amount of energy it takes to read is exhausting. I know of some, but I've forgotten all the names, lol. I'm like this too. One thing that people don't normally associate with dyslexia is kind of like memory recall, but that is also part of it. I'm trying to think, apparently John Lennon was, Hollow Willoughby, Whoopi Goldberg, there's lots. We got Darcy Russell, Brian Connolly.
Sorry, it's Brian Connolly and Darcy Russell. The autocorrect was going a bit mad there.
I thought that's who you were on about, but like, I mean, I just assumed that was my dyslexia. So here are just a couple, like a handful, all right? So in Star Trek, arguably, Spock is seen as dyslexic. Not really, because like, you know how he kind of mixes his words up, but that's because he's an alien with another language. But we've got to put this in a real world context on what they were probably influenced by. You got Game of Thrones, Jaime Lannister, possibly because of the time period that Game of Thrones was set in, so maybe not on that. The one, and probably one of the only positive representation of dyslexia, is in Glee, where it's one of like the newer characters called Ride Lynn. And here he says, he actually talks about having a dyslexia specialist supporting him, and it's actually shown as an advantage. So Glee, love it or hate it, actually one of the few positive examples of difference. We've got 2005 until present, actually. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Charlie Kelly. I love that show so much, though they do continuously refer to his dyslexia, his poor ability to read as dyslexia. It's like, you're definitely dyslexic, Charlie. In later episodes, we find out that no, he's just dyslexic in English. He's actually completely fluent in Irish, or maybe even Latin. So it's kind of interesting that they eventually do change that narrative, but 9 times out of 10, they're talking about it as a negative. But The Crosby Show, who watches that these days, Holly Willoughby from ITV, we got Dominic Wood from Dick and Dom, has dyslexia, Liam Butcher from EastEnders, and Christina Yang from Grey's Anatomy. So there are lots of people with dyslexia, be it fiction or real, who have dyslexia. And I think it's really positive to talk about them. Like people like Holly Willoughby, everyone loves her. So the fact that she has dyslexia is a positive example. Imagine when you say, oh, I have dyslexia, rather than thinking of all these negative stereotypes that are being pushed on people every single day, they're thinking of positive examples like Holly Willoughby, like Richard Branson, like Steve Jobs, people who have positive views and successful. Like, that would be great, wouldn't it? Yes, I remember the EastEnders storyline with Liam. Yeah, classic. Okay, now I appreciate some of these you are not going to heard of. Like, for instance, I'm not sure many of you would be aware of The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, probably aimed at a bit of a younger audience, but still really important, because if this is what children are growing up with watching, this is the view they're going to have of learning differences. So London, which is that one, I believe, is kind of seen as a bit lazy, very ditzy, argumentative, but their backstory is there was neglect, they had to sacrifice education, but insults like, I met bread smarter than you. So they are very much like, they are the point of laughter. They are the joke, the gag, which is like, oh, them being them again, making mistakes. Though I don't like that, what I do like about the show is that they kind of they flesh out the character a bit more. They talk about the fact that they had to sacrifice education. There was neglect. They weren't able to develop that area. So though it sucks that they're still being kind of shamed for not being the brightest car in, the brightest, they do kind of explain why that person might find those things difficult. So negative, but maybe we're getting a bit better. And I think this was like 2000. So progress is being made, but still, kids are going to be using that insult. So a quick question to all of you again. If you tell someone you are dyslexic, what is normally their first reaction? Like, is there something they say every time? I can definitely think of a few myself. People will say things like, oh, I know someone who's dyslexic, or, oh, my nephew can't read, or, oh, yeah, I don't like reading books as well, or, oh, do words move around for you? Like, kind of like the common things you hear time and time again. Here we go. I'm definitely interested in finding out more about other communities / ethnicities with dyslexia, as well as hear them being spoken about alongside the Hollies and the Richards. I agree with you. I totally agree with you. There are examples. I'm trying to... Margaret Pocock, the space scientist and TV personality, it has female black and has dyslexia. There's others with like ADHD in that. We need more representation, though. It is true. Okay, yeah, what we've got. What do people always say to you when you tell them they're dyslexic? Yeah, my friend is. Always. Really? Yeah, people are like, no, you can't be dyslexic. I saw you read the other day. You are not dyslexic. Yeah. All right, fair enough. You know, I have spoken to a dyslexic specialist. I do struggle every day of my life, but you get it. You understand. I know someone who has it. Yeah, my friend is. Silence. You don't look dyslexic. Obviously, that's the classic one. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Sorry, I don't look too dyslexic, but you just got to trust me on this one. So all these are sadly very, very true. And this typically comes from the fact of the media that people watch. Let's face it, parents don't really do much raising these days. You're sat in front of the TV, and that is going to be the thing that teaches you every day of your life. Well, it's always been like that, but you can see how it happens. Now for another obscure one. Again, I honestly don't believe if any of you seen this. I used to watch this growing up. It's Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide. It was on, well, it might be Nickelodeon. Yeah. So this guy here, a bit of a jock, you know, he likes playing sports, and his girlfriend catches him giving sports tickets to nerds in exchange for them doing their homework because he can't read. The episode ends with, you guessed it, Seth studying to learn how to read. So they normally show someone as being a bully, as being dumb, as being a cheat, for being neurodiverse. And they always like to say the end goal, the place where we want the person to get to, is being able to read, not having the difficulties. Very rarely do shows show someone continuing to have the same difficulties, but coming to peace at it or finding their own strategies. Normally it's about changing them or kind of transforming them into a functioning member of society or the group. With TV shows, it's a bit difficult because, for instance, a character is portrayed to be like a bad character, but because TV shows tend to make things very black or white, but obviously we all know that people are three-dimensional, and I think showing that can greatly help. If every kind of like old person with like spots is shown as an evil person, every woman with is shown as like argumentative or a gold digger, like these stereotypes, they do stay in people's minds. It's why, you know, people have age discrimination, because we have been shown as all old people have Alzheimer's and forgetful. In actual fact, memory loss isn't part of aging. It's a disorder. It's something which shouldn't happen. But yet we have kind of grouped them together as that is just what happens. We've got, yes, there are assumptions that sporty people are dumb or lacking academic qualifications. That is another one. So, okay, you're sporty. No, reading and writing might not be your thing. So you have to find other ways to express yourself and show your ability, but they are always portrayed as dumb. You see, I'm getting very passionate, but hopefully you are too. Quick question though, how was school for you? Because TV loves talking about school. You know, there's so many shows about school-age kids. And you're either kind of seen as like the smart nerd who can't fit in, or the dumb jock who isn't able to spell his own name. But you don't seem to get much diversity. Why can't you be smart but still find certain things more challenging? Or why can't you be into sports and be able to read and write and also be very intellectual, intelligent? Now, unfortunately, this shows me that none of you got support. You all found education difficult, and making friends was easier than the others, but difficult. And it really does impact every part of your life. People kind of like brush dyslexia off as not a big thing, but when it's something which affects every element of your early development, such as making friends, you know, different grades, education, it's going to impact on your confidence and, well, you name it, it's going to impact it. We've got, on the show Heroes, Matt Parkman, he has extreme dyslexia and he's basically illiterate, but he's also a superhero. So kind of changing the narrative around to quite a modern approach is showing disabilities as superpowers. I want to know, is this a good thing? You know, do you think dyslexia should be treated like a superpower in the media? Yes, no, yes, but not like that. I get quite passionate about this because I used to like, you know, when people say, because, you know, your whole life you've been told it's a bad thing, and now people are like, it's a superpower. But I personally don't like that because it neglects the fact that it is still a difficulty. Every day of your life, you have to swim up the stream, go against the grain. So I think we should appreciate the challenges that people have to go through, but also promote the strengths as well. It has to be a balanced approach. You can't just kind of flip the coin. You've got family and friends don't realize how much dyslexia affects your whole life. Absolutely. So I'll skim through these now because we're nearly at the end. But on animation, we've got The Simpsons. Who doesn't love The Simpsons? And in the first season, Krusty the Clown is accused of robbing the Quickie Mart, and he was found out he couldn't have robbed it because he is illiterate. So he was like exonerated. It was Sideshow Bob. They kind of like forget about this as the show goes on, but it was used as a plot narrative to kind of prove his innocence. We've got Knuckles in Sonic Boom. This is like a new version of Sonic, and Knuckles is shown that he can't read. Now, what I find interesting about this is that he puts his glasses on to read, and there is always this kind of link between, having glasses and being able to read. I don't know why, but he is shown as a beefy, strong individual who isn't able to read. Why do we always link these together? We talked about how race and dyslexia and intelligence are linked, but also sports and your physical physique. Like if you are muscly and strong and good at sports, you are seen as someone who most likely isn't the brightest. We've got The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. Again, an obscure one, but one of my favorites. And Billy's dad is shown that he can't read. And what I find interesting is Billy is really ashamed of this. So they portray dyslexia as something you shouldn't be proud of, something you should look down upon him. Very small, it's not a big part, but actually sometimes the things that are very small have the biggest impact because they're seen as pure fact, nothing we should kind of explore further. We got, okay, agree. I feel dyslexia is also not a positive subject in some communities. Being or aiming for smartness is the default. I completely agree with you. We've done a previous webinar on like dyslexia in different cultures, and I think well worth a watch because we do kind of talk about how different cultures have different names and different views. And even if we're looking at Western media today, even if that is making small progresses, what about all the other media from different cultures which haven't even started the subject? So quick one, is this anyone in your family dyslexic? Your parents, your siblings, your wider family? I ask this because we know dyslexia is hereditary, so it runs in the family. And if your parent tells you they are dyslexic, surely that should be a very uplifting thing, a very empowering thing. But we saw in Billy and Mandy that they showed a parent being dyslexic, and rather being a role model for the individual who is always kind of made out to be dumb, they show him being disappointed and kind of ashamed of him. So for me, that this is like very contentious. We should be praising individuals for saying they are dyslexic, because that way other people will see it as a positive. We all have role models, whether it's your boss, your parent, people in your life. So if they have the confidence and the courage to talk about it, we should show it as like the place to go. So, okay, we've got someone who says wider family. There are other neurodiverse conditions. Absolutely. ADHD, autism, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, Tourette's, lots of them. But I'm focusing on dyslexia today just because this is the one that is portrayed the most in media. A quick one from Family Guy. And I actually like this one because Chris actually, he sums it up pretty well. It's from the episode Throw It Away. And he says, I know the letters when they're on their own, but when they team up like this, I'm just like, I'm sort of outmatched. And I know they use it as a running gag, but it is exactly how I feel like when they get together, it's kind of overwhelming. And that's why I find books quite intimidating, just because of how much is on the page. I don't know why his arm has fallen off, but interesting view anyway. We've even got in Disney films, which kids view. So we've got Bing Bong from Inside Out, who can't read at all. And because he can't read, he doesn't know danger means danger and gets himself in trouble. People with dyslexia are often seen as less trustworthy. So, you can't look after children, you can't be in control of that, or we can't give you that responsibility because we're seen as a liability. So this does impact the jobs that we are giving, the opportunities. I was never allowed to babysit or look after anyone or pets because people just assumed if I'm in charge, things are going to go bad. No, I might have dyslexia, but that doesn't mean that I can't look after people or that automatic danger is going to follow. I'd love to know if any of you have had similar experiences on this. Animal Farm, this is a big one, okay? I love Animal Farm, and I can't go into today what's the significance, but the pigs can read, dogs can read, but they don't like to. The donkey can read, but chooses not to. The goats only read from newspapers, and everyone has different abilities of what they can and can't do because everyone is unique and different. But the people who take the hierarchy are the pigs, because they see themselves as better, more pure than natural leaders. Animal Farm is a great bit of literature for many reasons, but it actually has a really important message to do with how we value people in society based on factors which we put value in. So if you know it, you'll know the boxer and Clover and the donkey are amazing characters that have so much to contribute to the society. But because they don't have the same skills as those in charge, the pigs, they are looked down upon. Okay, comics. We've got this Charby the Vampire. I've not read it myself, but I wanted to include a comic for the comic fans. We've even got pro wrestlers where they will kind of be empowering, but they'll just kind of use their dyslexia. I never learned to read. Whoa! It's kind of quick comic effect. We've got video games. In Crash Bandicoot Racing, every time a Crunch kind of crashes, he kind of cries I never learned to read. For the fact that reading is a challenge, linking to the fact of when he loses. So you kind of make this connection of not being able to read, not being able to do something, and failing. So you see how you're linking something which someone can't help with something which is a failure. It's creating this it's reinforcing this view that struggling to read and write, communicate, dyslexia is inherently a bad thing. And as we've agreed as a group, yes, we acknowledge there are challenges. You can't escape that, but there are also lots of positives as well. But that isn't being reflected in the media we consume on a daily basis. So my last question to all of you, how do you think the media should portray dyslexia on screen / in print? So this is the end now. What could we do if you were in charge of it? How would you want it to be portrayed? Show our creative sides? Absolutely. For me, I just want to see people who are more fleshed out, more three-dimensional, because it's not just dyslexic equals dumb. Why can't it say, I'm dyslexic, but I'm also a pilot, or, whatever. Show that there's multiple sides of people, or show that creative side, show that innovation side. I don't want it to be a superpower, but can't it just be a thing that there's pros and weaknesses? So showing it in a bit more of a realistic light. I don't want a PC world. I love kind of controversial. I love jokes, but there is a way of doing it which doesn't continue to give the wrong message across. Just balance people out. We've got neutral, positives, and negatives. Absolutely. So I hope you enjoyed that. I know it's a whirlwind. I get really passionate about it because it's something which I love media so much. I love TV and I love films, but when I see people, they're not represented, like the same things churn out time and time again. It's lazy writing. It's negative for society as a whole. And also, like, we deserve better now. But anyway, if you enjoyed today, the one we're doing next week is Autism Across Culture. And this is when we're looking at how have people viewed autism across culture? You know, do different people see it as positive, negatives, the different words for it, people's understanding? We're taking a nice deep dive in that. So do join us for that if you're able to. And if you liked today, check out our YouTube channel, like and subscribe. We're going to have this edited. This is going to be uploaded soon, but we have other ones on pop culture as well. There's dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, autism. Autism is a fascinating one on how it's been shown in media over the years. Not great and still not great, but there is becoming more and more obvious. Any quick questions you got? Because of the struggles, nice. I feel like I've answered that, which is good. Yep, perfect. So if you thought, this is great, Nat, you know, I would love to get in contact and, you know, either get further support or just, you know, stay in the loop, here's our details, get in contact. But I really hope you found that useful and a bit of an interesting dive. I know it's incredibly niche, but it is important. And hopefully if we can get more representation, then the next generation will have a more positive view of themselves. And hopefully maybe one day organizations like Exceptional Individuals will not exist because everyone will be treated fairly and equally. Well, that's the hope anyway. But thanks everyone. And thanks for spending some of your Thursday with me.